If you're an intuitive introvert, chances are you're not okay. You've probably felt it for years, like your mind works differently, but no one around you sees it. You pick up too much, you see too deep, you feel things before they happen, and carry pain no one else even notices. You've been told you're sensitive, overreacting, paranoid. But Carl Jung didn't think so. In fact, Jung warned us. He saw the unique danger of this kind of mind, and what happens when your vision outpaces your ability to hold it. This video is for those who live with that burden, and it might finally explain why you've always felt like you're breaking, even when everything looks fine on the outside. You walk into a room and your stomach tightens. Not because of what anyone says, not because of what they're doing, but because something deeper in you knows. Something is off. A smile too wide, a voice too light, a tension hiding behind someone's eyes. And just like that, without warning or reason, you feel the truth of a situation no one else even sees. A month later, the lie unravels, the secret explodes, the mask falls, and everyone around you is shocked. But you aren't. You already knew. You didn't want to know. But you did. And you always do. You dream about a friend's breakup weeks before it happens. You feel the betrayal in your chest like it's your own. You try to warn them, but they laugh it off, call you paranoid, dramatic, overthinking again. You sense the undercurrent in meetings, in family dinners, in phone calls. You feel who's hiding pain, who's afraid of being found out, who's not telling the truth, even if they don't know it themselves. And when you say it out loud, people tell you you're imagining things. Too sensitive, too intense, too negative. So eventually, you stop saying it out loud. You stop speaking your truth. You learn to stay quiet, not because you're wrong, but because you're always early. You see it before they do. You feel it before they're ready. And the world isn't kind to those who see before others are prepared to look. Carl Jung had a name for this. He called it introverted intuition. And in his lifetime of psychological work, he identified it as one of the rarest and most misunderstood functions in the human psyche. People with dominant introverted intuition, intuitive introverts, don't just live in the present moment. They live in meaning. They're not scanning what's happening. They're reading what it means beneath the surface. They're not reading body language. They're reading reality itself. To Jung, this wasn't mysticism or magical thinking. It was an entirely different operating system of consciousness. And in his view, intuitive introverts, especially those who remain unaware of their inner architecture, often live some of the most psychologically complex, painful, and alienated lives of any personality type. Not because they're broken, but because they are deep receivers in a noisy world. Because they are visionaries in a culture that only sees what's in front of it. Let's be clear, this is not about personality quizzes. This isn't pop psychology. This is about what happens when a mind is designed to perceive the invisible. What happens when your mind bypasses the obvious and connects directly to symbolic meaning, to pattern, to potential, and no one around you knows what to do with that. Jung identified 4 primary cognitive functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. Most people lead with sensation. They understand the world through what they can measure, touch, confirm, and test. Their minds are tuned into what is real right now. The chair in the room, the tone of voice, the result on a test, the facts on a page. But intuitive introverts, They bypass the obvious. Jung described introverted intuition as a function that turns inward, absorbing signals from the unconscious. Not your unconscious alone, but the collective unconscious, the shared psychological architecture of human beings across time and culture. This is what makes the intuitive introvert so different. They don't just sense the people in the room. They sense the stories those people are unknowingly living out. They don't just hear someone speak. They feel the archetype moving through them. The mother, the betrayer, the healer, the child, the destroyer. These patterns aren't intellectual. They're visceral. They rise through dreams. They flash in symbols. They whisper through a word someone didn't mean to say. And while the rest of the world is focused on what's real, the intuitive introvert is navigating a dimension that is rarely acknowledged, let alone honored. It's not just perception, it's pattern recognition of the most existential kind. But this isn't always a gift. In fact, Jung thought it was often a burden. Because the intuitive introvert lives in two realities: the outer world of forms and facts, what everyone else sees, and the inner world of becoming, where truths unfold before they are visible. And the psychological strain of holding both is immense. It's not just that others don't understand you, it's that you can't always explain yourself. Because what you perceive isn't verbal. It doesn't arrive in sentences. It arrives in knowing. And over time, this makes you question your sanity. You think, maybe I'm just too sensitive. Maybe I'm imagining things. Maybe it's better to stay quiet. And that, Jung said, is when the real danger begins. Because while everyone else gets to move through life with one operating system, you're forced to live in a split state. You're constantly translating between what is and what is becoming, between what people say and what you know they mean, between who they believe they are and the archetype that's driving their life. You see the ending in the beginning. You hear the echo of wounds in someone's offhand joke. You watch people reenact ancient psychological dramas without even realizing it. And because the world doesn't reward this kind of sight, you begin to feel like you're the broken one. But you're not broken. You're just seeing more than most people can handle. You were born with a visionary's wiring in a world that teaches people to fear the unknown. And without support, without language, and without integration, that wiring becomes a trap. In the next section, we'll explore what Jung saw as the 3 psychological traps of the intuitive introvert, and why so many people with rare insight end up drowning in their own minds. You'll learn why your gift feels like a curse, why silence becomes your safety mechanism, and what it really means to carry symbolic vision in a world obsessed with appearances. Because the difference between transformation and collapse, between visionary and burnout, is not whether you see too much. It's whether you learn to hold what you see without losing yourself inside it. So what happens when you live your life caught between 2 realities? What happens when you perceive the truth behind things, but live in a world that only values what's visible? According to Jung, 3 specific psychological dangers emerge for the intuitive introvert. 3 inner traps. 3 hidden wounds of the visionary mind. Each of them begins subtly. They're not obvious. At first, they feel like coping mechanisms, but over time they become distortions, patterns that can unravel your sanity if not understood. Let's break each one down. The first is what Jung called archetypal inflation, and it's exactly what it sounds like. As an intuitive introvert, you're constantly perceiving archetypes, ancient, universal patterns embedded in the collective unconscious. You feel them animating people's behaviors. The hero, the mother, the wounded child, the trickster, the orphan. You see the emotional blueprints of humanity playing out in modern life. But over time, something begins to shift. You stop observing the archetypes. You start identifying with them. You begin to see yourself as the prophet, the one who sees what others can't, the one burdened with sacred knowledge, the one chosen to suffer for the sake of the blind. And for a while, it even feels right. Your insights are real. Your predictions are accurate. Your inner world is vivid and symbolic. But then, the balance tips. You begin to lose your personal identity. You start merging with the symbol. You become the archetype. And when that happens, Jung says, you are no longer an individual. You are possessed by the unconscious. And the scariest part, you don't feel delusional. You feel important. You feel like your suffering is special, like your detachment is noble, like your pain is destiny. This is archetypal inflation, and it isolates you from the very humanity you were meant to guide. You don't share insights anymore. You pronounce them. You stop listening. You stop learning. Your vision no longer serves truth. It starts serving your identity. And without grounding, you become cut off from the ordinary world, convinced you are above it or beyond it. This is where many intuitive introverts lose the plot, because they mistake their gift for superiority, and their insight becomes ego armor instead of medicine. The second trap is psychic contamination. And while archetypal inflation inflates your ego, psychic contamination erases it entirely. This is the other extreme. Instead of identifying with something larger than yourself, you start to dissolve into everything around you. As an intuitive introvert, you're naturally sensitive to emotion, energy, and unspoken dynamics. But when you haven't developed healthy boundaries, this perception becomes absorption. You don't just notice someone's sadness, you feel sad for the rest of the day. You don't just sense anxiety in the room, it burrows into your chest like it's your own. You pick up fear, shame, tension, like static clinging to your psyche. And before long, you don't know where you end, and they begin. Jung observed this in many of his patients. People who would walk into therapy sessions carrying the emotional weight of their entire family, their partner, even strangers. These weren't empaths in the social media sense. They were psychically porous, wide open to the unconscious material of others, with no psychological filters in place. He saw it as a collapse of psychic boundaries, an ego unable to maintain integrity in the face of deep collective currents. And the cost is massive. You become addicted to being needed. You start defining your worth by your ability to soothe, fix, or absorb the pain of others. But over time, you vanish from your own life. You lose your inner thread. You become a caretaker of other people's stories, while yours remains untold. It feels noble, it feels compassionate, but it's just another kind of erasure. Your intuitive gift becomes a trap of over-responsibility. And the saddest part? No one sees it. Because you're so good at being there for everyone else, no one thinks to ask if you're okay. You've become a silent container for everyone's unspoken grief. And unless you learn how to energetically differentiate, you'll confuse absorption with empathy forever. Now we arrive at the third trap, symbolic overload, the slowest, most disorienting one. the quiet breakdown of your ability to tell what's real. You've spent so much time in the symbolic dimension, in dream work, intuition, archetypal patterns, that you start to see everything as meaningful. A license plate becomes a message. A stranger's comment becomes a prophecy. A synchronicity becomes a cosmic sign that destiny is unfolding. And here's the thing. Sometimes it is meaningful. Sometimes your intuition is showing you something real. But without grounding, you can no longer discern whether you're receiving a message from the unconscious or projecting your emotional state onto the world around you. You live in constant metaphor, and reality becomes harder and harder to grasp. Jung warned of this exact moment. He said that when an intuitive introvert loses their connection to sensation, to the body, the moment, the earth, their mind becomes a hall of mirrors. Everything is a symbol. Everything has a hidden meaning. Everything feels connected, until you lose the thread of what's actually happening. You start to believe things that feel real, but have no anchor in truth. You become susceptible to magical thinking, to conspiracy, to delusion dressed in archetypal clothing. And in this trap, your greatest gift becomes your undoing. You're not seeing patterns anymore. You're inventing them to survive the chaos of your own unprocessed content. This is what Jung meant when he said the intuitive introvert is always at risk of being consumed by the very unconscious they were built to explore. So let's pause. Have you felt yourself in any of these? That part of you that quietly believes your suffering makes you special, that you've been chosen in some mythic way. That exhaustion from carrying emotional weight you didn't ask for. That subtle paranoia that every moment is secretly trying to tell you something profound. These are not flaws. They're not weaknesses. They are survival strategies developed by minds that were never given proper training. Jung didn't judge these patterns. He studied them and taught that the only way out is through integration. In the next section, we'll begin the journey toward that integration. We'll look at the 3 stages of transformation every intuitive introvert must face, and how the difference between becoming a fractured mind or a powerful bridge lies in what you do after the collapse. Because this gift can't be denied, but it must be understood, and it must be grounded, or it will drown you. Jung believed that people with dominant introverted intuition follow a very specific psychological journey, whether they realize it or not. A path that always begins with awe, and so often ends in isolation. But if faced fully, it can also lead to something rare, a kind of self-possession that turns visionary overwhelm into deeply grounded wisdom. He broke it into 3 stages: the gift, the curse, and the integration. Let's walk through each one. Stage 1. The gift. This stage usually begins early, often in childhood, sometimes in adolescence, occasionally later in life, triggered by a trauma, a spiritual awakening, or a period of deep loss. But whenever it begins, the experience is the same. You realize you're different, not smarter, not better, just different. You see things other people don't. You notice subtle emotional shifts. You sense where something is heading long before it arrives. You experience vivid dreams, strange synchronicities, inexplicable gut feelings that always prove correct. And at first it feels magical, like you've been given a secret language the world doesn't understand. You walk through life like you're reading between the lines of reality itself. You feel chosen, gifted, special, and in a way, you are. But it doesn't take long for the cracks to appear. You mention your insights, and people brush you off. You predict something, and they call it coincidence. You express discomfort about someone, and you're told you're overreacting. You begin to realize your truth doesn't fit in the world as it is. And slowly, this secret language becomes a private one. Not because you stopped seeing, but because the world refused to look with you. So you adapt. You learn to stay silent. You nod when others speak, even if you already know what they'll say next. You pretend you're surprised by outcomes you saw coming weeks ago. This is where many intuitive introverts begin wearing a mask, a version of themselves that feels palatable, even if it's not quite real. And while this mask protects you from rejection, it creates something else. Disconnection. Disconnection from others. Disconnection from your body. Disconnection from the present moment. Because the more you live in symbolic awareness, the less real life starts to feel. And as this mask solidifies, you enter the next stage. Stage 2. The curse. This is the collapse stage. It's what Jung described as one of the hardest psychological positions a person can find themselves in. Because now, the very thing that once felt like a superpower begins to feel like a burden. Your perceptions are too strong, your insights too constant, your emotional saturation too heavy. You're living in a storm of information no one else can see. And the worst part? You have no language for it. You can't explain why you know things. You can't trace the logic of your intuition. You just feel it, all the time, and with nowhere to put it. You begin to isolate, not because you hate people, but because interacting feels like a full-body sensory overload. Small talk drains you. Crowds overwhelm you. Superficial interactions make your skin itch. You try to be normal, but you feel like you're faking everything, especially your own happiness. You become exhausted by how much you pick up, how little you can say, and how deeply unseen you feel, even by the people who love you most. And then come the psychological traps we explored in the last section. Inflation, where your pain becomes identity. Contamination, where others' suffering becomes yours. Symbolic overload, where you stop trusting concrete reality altogether. At this stage, many intuitive introverts report experiencing frequent fatigue and burnout, emotional hypersensitivity, chronic self-doubt, a sense of existential loneliness, and a growing fear that they are either crazy or cursed. Jung wasn't surprised. He wrote that the intuitive introvert lives in a world which is as real to them as the outer world is to others. But the outer world has no patience for inner realities. And because of this, their entire self can begin to destabilize. Your body becomes a stranger. The present moment feels like a dream. Your internal world becomes louder than your external one. And here's the danger. If you stay here too long, you begin to build a life around your pain. You convince yourself that no one will ever understand you, that you'll always be too much, that your gift is a curse you didn't ask for, and now can't escape. But Jung didn't believe this was the end. He believed this was the turning point. Stage 3. The integration. This is where healing begins, not by going backward, not by suppressing your perceptions, but by building a life that can contain them. Jung believed that for the intuitive introvert to thrive, they must walk the path of individuation, the process of integrating the unconscious into the conscious self. In other words, you don't abandon your vision, you ground it. You don't silence your intuition, you translate it. You don't dissolve into others, You build boundaries that let you stay whole. But this path isn't easy. It requires discipline, self-awareness, and a commitment to living inside your body, not just your insight. It means learning to be a bridge, not a sponge. A translator, not a martyr. Someone who can live in both realities, the outer and the inner, and carry messages between them without getting lost in either. Integration is not perfection. It's not having all the answers. It's not being calm and wise all the time. Integration means you're no longer afraid of your depth. It means your sensitivity isn't a liability. It's a language. It means your vision isn't a burden. It's a tool. And most importantly, it means you stop living in isolation. You start building relationships that can hold your truth. You seek out people who value inner life. You learn how to share what you see, not for validation, but for service. Because once you understand how to carry your insight consciously, something beautiful begins to happen. You stop trying to be normal. You stop pretending to be shallow. You stop apologizing for being someone who feels more, sees more, and wants more meaning than the world often offers. In the next section, we'll dive deep into the 3 core practices Jung taught to help intuitive introverts complete this integration. Because it's not enough to understand the theory. You have to learn how to live it. You have to learn how to come home to yourself, not despite your visionary wiring, but because of it. Jung understood something essential. Insight alone isn't enough. Even the deepest intuitive awareness can become dangerous if it isn't grounded in structure. For the intuitive introvert, integration isn't a one-time realization. It's a daily psychological practice. And according to Jung, there are 3 disciplines every intuitive must develop to survive and ultimately thrive with their gift. Rebuilding the lost anchor of sensation, giving structured form to the formless, and developing conscious, flexible psychic boundaries. Let's explore each of these deeply. First, sensation. Jung taught that each person has a dominant psychological function and an inferior one. For intuitive introverts, sensation, the function responsible for body awareness, sensory input, and physical reality, is often underdeveloped. Why does this matter? Because without sensation, intuition becomes untethered. It begins to spiral. It becomes overwhelming, unmanageable, even dissociative. You lose touch with the present moment. You forget how to feel safe in your body. You mistake emotional floods for truth. Jung believed that to integrate the unconscious, you must balance it with its opposite, in this case, bringing the intuitive mind back down into the body. So how do you do that? Start small. Start physical. Practice mindful walking, noticing the pressure of your feet on the earth. Cook with presence, noticing taste, smell, heat, texture. Garden. Get your hands in soil. Touch living things. Move your body. Yoga, weightlifting, dancing. Anything that reminds you that you exist. Take cold showers, run in the rain, swim in the ocean. This isn't spiritual fluff. This is psychological grounding. You're not doing these things to become a sensation type, but to build a container strong enough to hold your perception. Jung referred to this as the marriage of opposites, where your weakest function becomes the stabilizing force that lets your dominant one shine. If your intuition is the river, sensation is the banks that keep it from flooding the land. The second practice, translation. Jung famously said, Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And the way to make the unconscious conscious is through translation. You must give form to the formless. As an intuitive, your inner world is rich, full of insights, images, feelings, flashes, and ideas that defy language. But if they stay inside you, unspoken, unshaped, unexpressed, they begin to overload your psyche. You need an outlet, not to impress, not to perform, but to externalize the symbolic chaos within. This might mean journaling your intuitive impressions, writing fiction or poetry that channels your dreams, creating art that expresses what logic can't, developing systems or theories based on what you feel is true. Teaching or mentoring others through your unique lens, recording voice notes just to get the meaning out of your body. Jung himself modeled this. His Red Book was a collection of inner visions, illustrated and written by hand, never meant to be published, simply a way for him to process the overwhelming contents of his unconscious. You need something similar, a place to shape what you receive. This is what turns chaos into clarity. It's how you stay sane. And more importantly, it's how you turn private knowing into collective medicine. The third practice, psychic boundaries, and perhaps the most important. Jung understood that intuitive introverts are deeply porous. They feel everything. They absorb everyone. And without boundaries, this becomes unbearable. But Jung didn't believe in shutting down intuition. He taught a concept called conscious permeability. This means you learn to choose when to open and when to close, when to sense deeply and when to protect yourself. Practically, this looks like visualizing energetic protection before going into crowded or emotionally intense spaces. Taking time alone after social interaction to clear what isn't yours. Having rituals of release, journaling, breathwork, movement, or even just a shower that symbolically cleanse what you've absorbed. Learning to say no without guilt. Learning to discern, is this mine? Or am I carrying something that belongs to someone else? This is boundary work for the soul. It's not about becoming cold or distant. It's about staying intact. When you don't manage your permeability, you become flooded, emotionally, psychically, physically. But when you do, you become a conscious vessel, open when you choose, closed when you need rest. Jung called this the development of standpoint, a place inside yourself that doesn't collapse under perception, a solid center from which you can interact with archetypal forces, human emotion, and unconscious content without losing your identity in the process. Because that's what integration is. It's not getting rid of your intuition. It's giving it a home. It's teaching your vision how to live in the world without burning you alive. In the final section, we'll explore what happens when all three practices begin to align. When the intuitive introvert no longer walks through life hiding or apologizing, but begins to own their gift, share their perception, and find the others who understand. We'll also return to Jung's vision of the bridge figure, the rare individual who learns to walk between worlds, not as a victim, but as a guide. Because this world needs what you carry, but only if you learn how to carry it well. So what happens when these practices take root? When you reconnect with sensation, give form to your inner world, and hold firm boundaries around your psychic space. You begin to transform. Your depth no longer isolates you. It empowers you. Your insight no longer floods you. It guides you. Your pain no longer defines you. It refines you. You become something Jung saw as incredibly rare. A soul that lives in two realities, but is not torn apart by them. You become a bridge. Jung believed that intuitive introverts, when integrated, had the potential to play a role that society doesn't always recognize, but deeply needs. They become the translators between the unconscious and the conscious, between inner meaning and outer action, between soul and system, between the dream and the design. This doesn't mean you become famous. It doesn't mean you become a spiritual leader or a healer or a mystic. It means you embody wisdom wherever you are. It means you can walk into complexity without being consumed by it. It means you can perceive deeply without projecting. It means you can sense clearly without carrying what isn't yours. You no longer feel the need to shrink. You no longer apologize for your vision. You no longer crave to be normal, because you realize your depth is not a flaw. It's a function, not a glitch in your system, but your system's superpower. And for the first time, your inner and outer lives begin to match. You speak less, but say more. You withdraw less, but rest more. You attract relationships rooted in depth, not surface performance. And finally, you find your people. Because when you become integrated, you start to recognize others who carry the same kind of vision. Not the ones who talk about it for attention, but the ones who've survived it. The ones who've felt the weight of symbolic awareness and made it through with their soul intact. You start to form alliances not based on similarity, but on shared depth, not surface compatibility, but inner resonance. These people won't ask you to dim your light. They won't flinch when you name what others avoid. They'll meet your intensity, not with fear, but with recognition. And suddenly, the loneliness begins to lift. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. You're no longer looking for safety through suppression. You're creating safety through structure. You're no longer a sponge. You're a vessel. You're no longer a seeker. You're a translator. You no longer need to be understood by everyone. You just need to be seen by the right ones. And this is the beginning of living with clarity, power, and peace, as a visionary who knows how to protect their sight. So, where are you on this journey? Are you still in stage 1, feeling the thrill of your perception, but unsure where it's taking you? Are you stuck in stage 2, overwhelmed, withdrawn, wondering if you'll ever feel at home in this world again? Or are you entering stage 3, beginning to gather the tools, the boundaries, and the confidence to live as who you truly are? Wherever you are, remember this. Your ability to see beneath the surface isn't a mistake. It's not a pathology. It's not a quirk. It's a calling and a responsibility. But it doesn't need to break you. You don't have to carry it alone. You don't have to carry everything. You just have to carry it consciously. So let's open this up. Drop a comment below and share where you are. Tell us, what's the most powerful intuitive hit you've ever had? When did you first realize your perception worked differently? What's been the hardest part of living with this kind of sight in a world that doesn't always value it? Your story might be the mirror someone else needs. Your words might be the lifeline that keeps someone from collapsing under their own depth. And if this spoke to you, if you want to go further into Jung's model, if you want to explore how shadow work, symbolism, and individuation intersect with modern life, make sure to check out the next video. We'll go deeper into Jung's forgotten methods for working with the unconscious, and how modern self-help has often taken those ideas out of context, leaving the most sensitive minds even more lost. Until then, protect your sensitivity, strengthen your sensation, build your boundaries, honor your perception, and above all, stay true to the gift that sees what others refuse to feel. Because this world was not built for people like you, but it needs people like you, not just to see the truth, but to help us remember how to live it. You are not broken. You are not cursed. You are a mirror, a pattern breaker, a visionary. And if you learn to carry what you see, you won't just survive, you'll guide the rest of us home.